This is a general discussion with Sian Lewis and Ian Kimber for the Griffith University Jubilee District case case at Brisbane on Thursday the 8th of February 1990, whatever we are, 6. I'll just leave it there.
Not a problem.
Now, Kevin, I saw yesterday. Who else did I see yesterday? I saw somebody else I spoke to. My mind is going blank. I'm just in an absolute daze. I'm running between. I saw some of the people involved in the amalgamation. I saw Jan Pratt from the EM.
Yep.
I'm seeing Ian Howard. Is that yeah?
He's the QCO
at the QCA. Yeah. I'll have to see somebody perhaps. Nobody from Mount Gravatt yet.
Well, do you know, I was actually involved in the amalgamation.
Were you?
I was the manager of BCA Union and I did all the amalgamation for student union.
That's right.
Yeah.
I glanced through the files of the amalgamation of Mount Gravatt, but I haven't actually, read in any depth, So that's, that's
You'll have to talk to Phil Mead.
Phil Mead, that's the name I have been given. Yeah. Well,
All right, thanks for knowing it. Yeah.
Right as rain, thanks, Trevor.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Phil Mead. Was he head of
He was the BCA. He was run centrally from the Kelvin Grove campus, and Phil. I mean, as I read the situation from BCA's point of view, Phil was the campus principal. I'm not sure what his title was, but he did some dealings directly with the university and was accused of doing that behind BCA's back. Because Boxman was the person who was running the institution, although he left in the time frame that the amalgamations were running. And I'm just trying to think who the director of BCA was. I should know if there was anything. You'll run across it.
Yes, I picked that up. There was quite a bit of animosity to me because of the perception that he was going with Union. He was neglecting the centralised body. Yeah. And in fact, there's some quite nasty letters.
Yes. There was also, I think, a perception amongst the Mount Gravatt staff at one point that he was seeking a vested interest for himself in the institution, and that he might have done some things with the university that were also against local Mount Gravatt people's interests, but you'd have to check that with staff there as to whether that was the same way they saw it or not. That was certainly the rumour running around in the student union type circles as to what students perceived was going on in the academia.
I see. There was a vote taken in the staff for something like 2 objections. I can't remember the number.
Yes.
Do you remember that vote? Do you remember that it was taken?
Yes, I remember that there was some staff.
I think there
was a lot of pressure on the staff at Mount Gravatt, but again, because I wasn't working at Mount Gravatt and I wasn't working on the staff, I wouldn't like to lead you up the garden path about that. I knew some junior staff at Mount Gravatt who felt they were very coerced about what their options were.
Really, between the lines, it seemed to me that it was a bit of a set-up to say, oh yes, everybody in Mount Gravatt is unanimous, but it just seemed to be a little bit too fast.
Yeah.
So that what you say sounds right. But there again, that's the sort of detail that I probably won't be able to go into.
No, of course. Yeah.
But it's good. Well, listen, can we come back to when you both, when you started anyway, Sharon?
Well, I started in 1975 in the first intake, the very first intake. So when I was there were 400 students, 100 in each school, and I was enrolled in humanities basically. And I was actually a student there from 1975 to 1980. I took a whole year off and became president of student union, chairperson it was then called. And I was chairperson of student union for about 2.5 years and student politician for about 4.5 years. And I tried to actually unbury all the list of committees I served on, but it failed to materialise because it was very extensive. But I've brought you some wonderful things that no one else would have given you in the world. This is actually the thing that the very first students got given about admitting themselves to Griffith University, and I really doubt that anyone else will have that. And I also have given you the first student handbook. You know how thick university handbooks and glossy are now? That is the very first ever delivered student handbook.
Absolutely fantastic.
And this is the one that was done the next year for people who are prospective applicants for the next year.
Yeah.
And I thought you would absolutely love this.
Oh, you're
because the headline is Griffith University, a place that has high ambition, first-class people, limited resources and its fair share of human weaknesses, John Willett. So,
absolutely fabulous.
and it has a lot of really interesting stuff in here for you about the initial published stuff about what the philosophy of the university was.
That's fantastic, because I want to compare that with what they've actually said to me and behind the scenes as well.
And it's really got some interesting stuff here. What sort of student is best suited to Griffith University? Are all students, you know, like the whole thing. And I thought it would be really interesting to
You're not wrong. Absolutely. I'll keep that very safe.
I would like these back because they're historical data, but you can have them now. The other really wonderful thing I found for you is the second edition ever, or the second year middle edition of the student newspaper, one of the very, very early ones. And it does, there are some other articles in here as well that you might find. Like there's an article here criticising first year humanities assessment methods tongue-in-cheek. And I've also got the 1978 and 1979 student union produced orientation handbook. And specifically in here there's actually quite a slightly embittered student view in the middle of how the university sees themselves as opposed to how we see them. It's a little encapsulated potted version of student views of the schools in this year, which I thought you would really, really be pleased to have, and no one else will ever give you those.
Oh, look, that's absolutely. Look, I didn't expect this to go quite trouble.
Well, I had them, and it's bizarre that I've had them for so long. I guess it shows you how much
look, you know what it's like when you're writing this stuff to refer to is just...
Yes, the blue section is pretty interesting. And you know what came up to me the other day? That's the 1975 student handbook, because is the humanities degree course and structure.
That was...
She was right, the very first compulsion. Yes.
He's pretty disinterested, I think, he was blind when he was blind. But he was very interesting to talk to as well. Fascinating.
And I don't know if you've got any attempt, if you have any chance to inject humour, but that is the 1976 official university scavenger hunt conducted on opening day in 1976. It was composed by John Lewis, and it is very funny. And this is an authentic document from Zelman Cowan, because one of the things we had to collect from the humanities team was advice. And we gave him the bench advice, and he wrote a letter and gave back to us his very ugly advice.
Look, that's magic.
I thought that would be funny for you to have.
It will. I will do that too. I will use something like this.
I just thought you might want to throw it into light relief, basically, because the whole thing could be...
I think it could be heavy.
Well, I think that the institution won't have... I mean, I think it's in the nature of the current Vice Chancellor and people that they may have with a whole serious side about it. So.
Yeah, don't be as much humor as I can inject into it reasonably by maintaining some sort of academic credibility.
And perhaps that will give you some more... That's the competition. That was the list of things that we had to collect. And that confirmed for me that it was in 1976, and that was the instructions as to what we had to do, and it was done for, I think, it may have been the university's first open day, although I really don't think there was one in 1975. I don't know, but you may be able to find out. But anyway, there was many, I could tell you many stories about that later on, just going into it. So.
No, look, I appreciate that knowledge, I really do, because as you say, I'm not going to get that anywhere else.
I don't think so.
It's fabulous. It's really... Tell me, anyway, just to recap, you were a student from 75 to 80, and then you went into the union, was it?
And then no. During 1975 to 1980, I was a student in the School of Humanities. Also at that time, I became heavily involved in student politics, both on the campus and at a state level and nationally as well. So I think my first position was, in fact, how I got involved in the university, bizarrely enough, I do remember this. The university put an ad in the paper before they actually had any students on site in about the November or the December prior to the February commencement of teaching, and asked the students who wanted to come to the university to help put together some sort of publication for new students. And myself and about 4 or 5 other students actually went to the university before it was even open, and actually put together some this publication, which was actually a sort of welcome to Griffith from this group of students, and the university actually sponsored it. I heard John Willett speak about the university. He actually himself went to a number of schools in the local area, and I was at McGregor High School, which was around the Garden City area and not very far away, and I was completely inspired to go to Griffith University.
And very charismatic, personally.
Very charismatic, exceptionally charismatic, and not only that, but the philosophy appeals to me.
Sure.
And so I started in 1975, and as I said, there were 300 students in one building, which was the Humanities building. The Science building was the only other teaching building on the site, and there was University House and the building the bit opposite the reading pit was the whole library building as well as university offices. And I extended my 3-year course to 5 years because of my involvement in student politics, and dropped in and out of various subjects, and probably became more of a student politician than a student over the period that I was there.
No, tell me about John Willett and how he presented the university from your perspective.
Well, what I really remember about it was about 3 things. It was going to be problem-oriented, 20th century, interdisciplinary, and challenge authority.
Right.
That's pretty much encapsulates what I...
That was the common selling point for probably at least the first 3 years, if not the first 5 years.
Yes. You want to go somewhere that's not a traditional university. We're not trying to be like a traditional university, come to us. And that very much appealed to me. It also appealed to me to go somewhere small. It appealed to me to go somewhere new, and that was another thing that was emphasised, basically. And I also remember and I'm not sure what the mix of students was, but in 1975, they're only admitting 100 students to each school. I think there was a very considerable portion. I mean, I have this picture of about 20%, but I'm not sure if it was that high, of students who were selected from mature age entry, which was extremely unusual for the university sector generally, and a very deliberate policy. I think Griffith University was driven by John Lewis in the early years, and everyone very much saw it as something that was his creation, and acknowledged it's his creation, that he put together many of the founding concepts and put together a picked team of people who would develop it that way, and it went on from there. I had a lot to do with him as a student politician, bureaucrat. I think he was very active and, looking back on it, quite interventionist in the student aspect of the life as well. And he had a philosophy students should be on committees. You'll find in some of that documentation grave criticisms from my point of view, how dare they say we're going to be involved in and put these token students on committees. But there were students on committees that I think are probably never in any other university in Australia been represented. And there's no doubt in my mind that I thought that we belonged everywhere in the university, and student viewpoints belonged on all issues in the university, and that extends far beyond the normative range of what I think the traditional university involves students in. So I had a direct line to his office. I used to barge up. And bear in mind, I'm 17, 18, 19 and 20 during this period, and I thought that I could barge up to his office any time and barge in, and generally speaking I could.
The documents, just for information and background, so perhaps you could comment on that. The documents that exist on the interim council prior to John Willett ever being thought of, indicate that this was what was going to happen.
Sure.
The Ted Bray, Val Presley, Johnson, Melbourne, they had John Cannon got to a lesser degree, but more in the support area, and Carl was very involved from Adelaide.
Yes.
Now, all of these concepts were set up before Willett came.
Right.
And they were very much, now he took them and ran with them, and it seems as if he was committed to them as well. Did you get a lot of indication, obviously it was driven by Willett, but did you get a lot of indication that this was supported within the people who are actually setting the university up, or is it very much VC oriented?
I certainly was aware of Val Presley's involvement. For example, I wasn't particularly aware how much was defined prior to, I was at school when the institutional concept was developed, so the idea that I would have great knowledge about all that really doesn't fit the facts, basically. I think I had a concept that the university was going to be established. So there was going to be, I knew there was going to be a university. I knew there was a demand for student places and that Brisbane was growing and the government, that was kind of explained. Beyond that, I don't really recall any I really associated it with John Willett. But I think there was a lot of tension about all that in my experience of the first year of teaching, for example, as a student in 1975. I've read through a couple of those things before I came, just to refresh my memory. Humanities specifically went through about 5 chairmen, I'll use their word, in I can't remember how many years, but I found in 1979 that I said they've gone through 3 in the last 2 years. And I can remember going to lectures which were like, it seemed like watching battles. It seemed like watching battles being played out in front of you, and that's exactly, there were some bizarre things happening, and that's exactly what going to lectures was like. It was like, wow, and these lecturers were just up there into each other in the lecture theatre, and I wrote in a handbook in 1979, you'll work out quickly whose side you're on, and you'll run with that side, and if you cross-match your courses, you will be in great difficulty. Yeah,
absolutely, because you'll be taught one thing in this room, and be told the exact opposite in the next room in no short terms,
This was one of the teething problems of one of the basic fundamentals.
It was actually one of the problems with the philosophy, It was inherent to the philosophy.
So it wasn't just a problem with interdisciplinary thing, it was to do with the worldview of the different lecturers as well.
It was, and they were encouraged to express it, and the students were encouraged to take in and question, basically. Question what everyone told you. And I think the staff kind of took this on board as an opportunity then to often to wheel their own barrows. And I found some of it quite fascinating and exciting and quite intellectually stimulating, because you're getting all these points of views. No longer did you think that teacher is right, because you had 3 or 4 different teachers who had absolutely and utterly opposed points of view, and to the point where you might even be having one lecture given by 2 people or 3 people sometimes, each of whom quite clearly had totally different views on the subject of the lecture. But I think this was kind of part of the big experiment at the beginning, was to construct that kind of environment. And sometimes it was stimulating, and sometimes it was quite negative in its effect.
I think there was a big battlefield going on in humanities for a number of years, because the concept of interdisciplinary was, I think, new to the academic community as well. And they recruited discipline-based people, some of whom really wanted to hang on to their discipline-based concept.
And that's absolutely true, because some of the earlier people did.
And some of them did. And if you read the agenda...
And if they hadn't been tenured, they would have been booted out a couple of years.
It doesn't really surprise me when I read back through this about what they were trying to do in 1975, and the other thing I'm really aware of, because I was there from the November before doing the student work, was they were making it up as they went along. Absolutely. And they really didn't know from one year. You'd ask in first year, what are they going to teach in second year? And the literal answer was, we don't know yet. And some of those people, in fact quite a body of people, and I don't know how the facts will confirm this, but certainly my perception is the number of lectures started literally within months, if not weeks, of the semester starting. So time for them to build together any collegiate profile was completely absent, and the proper planning time that any academic would need to do their course stuff was absent. And so what was being played out was all of that stuff. But
I think you'll also find that over the first 3 years, each successive foundation year, the first year, was different. So they'd try one, didn't work. They'd quickly rewrite it, try another one the next year, didn't work. Quickly rewrite it, try another one the next year. So.
And it wasn't just the foundation.
No,
because my experience as a student, my experience was probably unique in that regard because I was there for 5 years, because I moved my own interests from one foundation program through to a completely opposing foundation program by the year, was that I dropped in and out of courses that should have been, instead of having 2 years in a main study program, I did 4 years in a main study program, often with a completely absent semester. I'd drop back in and I'd get back into class and think, what is this stuff? I don't have it. They wouldn't be teaching the same teachers. The people who were the gurus last year would be thrown out and there would be a new set of gurus. And I found it really difficult to graduate in the end.
Of course.
In fact, I got into the Ian Hunter, Foucault semiotics. Why didn't the revolution? Why does the language not exist anymore for the revolution to happen?
Sure.
I was sitting in a class where they rejected the whole dialogue which people lecture in normally, and I would be sitting thinking, I've got a brain and I don't understand what they're talking about. I don't even know what's going on. But I'll read you what they said the foundation course in 1975 in humanities is going to do. It's going to be organised around 3 key concepts: progress, relativity, and the universal and the individual. And the notion of progress is going to be discussed and how people reacted against progress, and we'd talk about that in film and literature. And we'd look about the notion of progress to work in the arts, and the idea of progress implicit in the theory of evolution. And then we'd discuss linguistic relativity, and then we'd discuss cultural relativity, then we'd discuss conventional signs and relativity in literature and the visual arts, and then we'd do a sociological examination of the concept of deviance. Now when you really look at that, there's just a whole bunch of disciplinary concepts at war with one another being taught sequentially by people who are playing out the war in front of you. And the whole idea, we began to challenge the whole notion, is this university really organised around 20th century problem solving and interdisciplinary when we're not seeing that going on in front of us?
There is no doubt. I mean, nobody who was involved in any power at the time makes any excuses out of the fact that they were making it up as they went along. Because, Trevor, I've left a bottle of red wine down in the car. I'll go and get it in a minute, okay? Oh, well, I'll bring it up afterwards, but if you want it for dinner, I'll get it.
You want?
I'll just make it.
I thought it would have been.
I'm not bothered one way or all. I went to the glass. Anyway, I left a bottle of wine in the car.
I was having a example of every tendency.
I don't care. No, all of it, that's wine with dinner, that's all. Yeah, but I'm just enough.
Just a glass of water and some biscuits.
No, I wanted to scratch it.
You're torturing the poor man. You've got to drive home.
Yeah, that's right.
Just
leave a note.
No, I'm right, no.
But yes, one point is they seem to have been very, very keen that there would be student, I think McKay's mentioned the word today, student involvement anyway, there was a word he used. Student-centeredness is actually a word.
Yep.
And it was very much, all of this was, I suppose what I'm saying is, I'd like you to comment on how successful they were, because they wanted interdisciplinarity, but undefined. They wanted student-centeredness, undefined. All of these things were consciously meant to be reactive to the traditionalism of UQ notes, etc., as you know. Foundation course, again, these are the things. And the general philosophy was no. But those 3 things, did they come across? How successful were they from your perspective?
If we're talking about in relation to the curriculum, I'm not so certain. But I think that they were really successful in developing a culture of the institution which did foster that. And when I look at the culture, I mean, of course, there's now a raging debate going on in institutions about moving to student-centeredness in the quality agenda and what the government's looking for in a good institution. And when I think about it, although I wouldn't necessarily been able to articulate it, the raging debates about common rooms as common areas, the creation of a board of community services, which was, okay, Everybody eats on campus. Most people have got kids on campus. It's not a staff-student distinction, and people recreate on campus. So we're going to set up this board of students and staff to manage that. So that whole concept of the board was a radical departure from the traditional university method of organising student service delivery. And as I said, there were students on a very wide range of committees. And all of this, in terms of the student political debates, I mean, it was, it was parking, we were amongst, all right, that's a traditional student issue. But if I thought that the medical centre wasn't delivering a good service, and I didn't like one of the counsellors there and what they were saying, I was up in the Vice Chancellor's office complaining about that. All right, we complained about how the buildings got developed, we complained about how much bush was cut down for things from time to time. I can't think of anything most students didn't think they could have a view about.
There was certainly a sense of empowerment there. Whether often that was when the students did react, sometimes it was ignored on some of the larger issues where the powers had already made up their mind they were going to do it anyway. But I think on quite a range of everyday issues, and there was a certain sense of that you did have the power to get together and petition, go and speak to people, and you could actually stop things or change things.
I think the other thing was you could jump up, just in terms of a lot of things that I've worked in other universities now, that you associate with universities. I didn't call people Professor so-and-so or so-and-so. I expected to see the Vice Chancellor eating his lunch in the recess, and he did. I expected to be able to walk up to the head of the school having a cup of tea and sit down and have a chat. I expected them to know who I was and them to know who I was. And there are a range of ways in which that has extended. I mean, the common room debates raged on in Griffith right through to the 90s about the rights of staff and this whole notion of no common spaces, and you felt like you didn't knock on the professor's door, the door was open all the time. And I can remember quite big debates amongst the academics about, we want to close our doors. No, you're not. That sort of thing. So in terms of creating a culture or a broadly based environment, because it does go beyond the teaching, I think that there were some quite positive things which have lasted quite a long time there. They've been quite enduring.
Yes, that is the sort of conclusion I'm trying to come to. I've had to try and address exactly that. What has survived out of what they intended. See Bray, Willett, and Topley, for instance, just to give an example. We definitely want an antithetical culture to Melbourne and UQ. We want student participation, but we want it to be real participation, but not to the point where it rocks the boat. Now, Ted Bray used to say, they're a fucking nuisance students, but we've got to have them. Now, he's a total, he's an anomaly, that man. He's a total walking contradiction. He really is. But at the same time, you have people like Ted C. yesterday. But now, the Board of Community Services was for the students, but really, we had to tell them there was something to do. So they did have a say, but we really controlled it. So, you had a bit where you could see students really were empowered, as you say, and there were other sections where there was a very strong element to say, well, we've got to put a parameter on that empowerment. Did you have a sense of that at all?
Well, if I talk about the Board of Community Services, I was involved with a number of other people in the replacement of Bill Abrahams as the Community Services Officer, because he was unacceptable to students.
I read about that.
I probably wouldn't want, I don't think the university or I would want to focus on that for because
it won't come into this.
But I went to the institution. I can remember 3 people that I was involved in moving either sideways or out of the institution because I had had significant feedback from students that that person was unacceptable and the institution responded. Now, to me, when I look back on that, I think, I don't believe that actually happened. However, I can remember in first year, in 1975 in humanities, in the first semester, there was a student revolt about the exam. We didn't win that one and we weren't even going to get close. That was so there were certain traditional aspects of academia that I think were non-negotiable.
A couple of people have mentioned about grading, rank orders of results put up on a notice board. Were you involved in saying we don't want results published and we won't have a rank order even put up on a notice board? And that was You felt that was part of the culture?
Yes, that was different.
Yeah, although that was a contest. There was a debate about that. I don't know how early it was, but there were a few heated debates about that. And I mean, for example, Ted Gray was very much on the side of marketing the institution, and that gives you the credibility to be alive, to be in the paper and published. But yes, that was a debated issue, and there were some people on the academic side, and there was an overwhelming body of radical students going over our dead bodies, and I think that was probably another one at the run. But you see the power distinction between attacking an assessment mode itself and attacking the peripheral issue of whether the assessment results are going to be published, and the increasing frustration of people. I think if you look at the dropout rate for students in 1975, it was very high, particularly from humanities, and I think that because they recruited a number of people who traditionally hadn't gone to university. They were very interesting people.
That was a very definite, clear policy. Beforehand, there were huge debates, as you can imagine, with the academics. We won't have any prerequisites because prerequisites are a load of shit. They're not standard. So we will make up our own sort of culture of prerequisites as we go along. And the second thing is we will take mature age students on the basis of an interview. So was that working well for you? How did that stamp itself on the culture of Griffith, I suppose?
Oh, I think it was a significant stroke of genius for the institution. But if they were trying to create an alternative, because and again it ran to the cultural issue, because if you had gone to the institution interacting predominantly with 17-year-olds, you got a totally different outcome than you went and interacted with people who were 20, 30, 40 and 50 with a whole range of life experiences, with a fairly dynamic capacity to question what was going on, and put that to the institution fairly forcefully. And my feeling is, from my own interaction with those students, that quite a lot of them dropped off on the way by having quick confrontations with the institution and judging that they had come for the alternate power situation, and it wasn't really what was there all the time. And so was the interdisciplinarity, but not quite working the way in which it might have been presented as a picture.
Well, Patience Thomas was interesting yesterday in a way. She gave an example of herself being a very conservative person. But she also... I'm not pleased by that. But she also had talking in town, for which she had great admiration for about some Walkley or something who had been involved. And he was forever interrupting all the lecturers about everything was a CIA plot. Now she found this both amusing, but at the same time was extremely positive about the fact that it existed. So what was there... would you label the students as coming from any socio-political background or socio-economic background?
Yes, I think that in fact there were some statistics done on the university about people from low socio-economic backgrounds, and the institution far exceeded national averages in the early years for attracting those sorts of people. And if I step out of the institutional concept, because I was involved in national student politics and state student politics, we had the most radical structure for a student union ever seen in the country, then or since. Possibly equally the most unworkable, but I mean, effectively,
that's a fault of the university too.
And they positively were prepared to put up with a student organisation which said, we're going to run on general meetings where everyone's going to go down there and everyone's going to put up their hand in both and everyone's going to go. In 1978 there was an abortion vote on our campus which has some other stories attached to it about some sub-agendas and my first experiences with violence and things. So 90% of the students on campus voted that women had a right to abortion on demand. We were the most active institution in all the civil liberties demonstrations that were going on concurrently. I have some photos at home if you wanted them of marches that happened from the top of the Griffith University hill down the bottom. And I perpetually went to the watch house and bailed out the statistically high average of participants who were Griffith University students. And I think that is another thing I would say about the institution, because if I look at where people are now, that I know that at Griffith University from 1975 to 1980, now you've got GUUS advisors, Simon Blackwood, you've got Lee Birmingham, who is involved in student politics, running a still very heavy agenda for the ALP now, having gone through various left organisations and become an ALP. You won't quote that. the person who just ran that, what's on it there, South Bank at the moment, Glamour?
Yeah.
He's a Griffith University student. The director of that production was a Foundation Humanities student, David Pyle. I mean, in some senses, despite all the criticism, people did question authority there. People did develop some very broad basic skills, and people have turned up. I'll give you some other really great examples, but not from Griffith. Student political activists from some of the other campuses, and there are only one or two, who went round to sell the agenda to the campuses about introducing HEX, an ex-student politician, and who went round for Dawkins, this is both for Dawkins, and sold to the institutions the notion that amalgamation was a good thing, another student activist. But there are a lot of, and while I can single out those campuses and say, I can now find that name, you know, like A. Simon Marginson, who's now Dr. Simon Marginson, writes heavily in education political debates about education economics. I could find one or two names, but when I come to Griffith, possibly because it's my own institution, but I really do think when you look around, you find them peppered in the most influential places, and that's another positive I would see to the thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that sounds, I'm just told far.
Got it on tape.
Yeah.
Right. In relation to whether Griffith got further than other institutions in changing the socio-economic mix of students attending to the university. Yes, my feeling was certainly between 1975 and 1980, at least that's the period I was there as a student that occurred. Maybe around, and I was also on staff. I went straight from being a student there to being a staff member, having stayed there till 1988. And then went to BCE and got amalgamated back with them 9 months later.
I would say it extended further than that.
Yeah, you made it
I
around
can remember
longer.
doing figures in when I was working in humanities. When they were doing that big review headed by the ABC woman, Dame Kramer, when they were doing that big university review, and I spent months getting figures together, and some of those were demographic kind of things, and even then, and this would have been 83, 84, even then it was well ahead of other institutions in terms of people from lower socioeconomic groups.
Do you get the impression that that's changed
I
considerably?
really don't know. I don't have enough contact with it. From a new observation, I would say that's changed.
Griffith has, it's still in the first band though, in institutional rankings about affirmative action around the country.
Yes.
And with some of the statistics that came out in relation to that national report, it's still doing quite well. And I think that may not be a picture of how well Griffith is doing as opposed to a picture of how poorly other people are doing.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very valid point, actually.
And if I said how well is Griffith doing, I'd say less well than when it started. But it may still be doing considerably better than relative to other places.
That makes sense. That fits in, I think. What? You weren't there for the games. You were on staff.
I was there for the games.
What impact did the games have?
Sweat pizza.
I was going to say that.
So we missed it. Yeah. We missed out the best of these.
I think it was very well planned.
Actually, during the games, I had a hell of a bad time.
I think it
I don't know
was
what students would have thought at the time.
I don't know
It was extremely disruptive, of course. I can remember I went back to do... it was that year I was enrolled in the arts program, And it was disruptive because for several months, well not for that long, but for the duration of the games, and there was no access, or pardon me, very limited access to the campus towards resources, etc.
And
I found that hard to deal with.
And I had someone that stayed in my house for that duration of time who'd been a village resident who had nowhere to go, and that was a very disruptive exercise as well. But what I knew about that was this. In fact, I got drunk with John Lewis in his office one afternoon, and we were talking about student accommodation. And this is how far I think he thought about what was going on in his organisation. Far farther than I think most vice-chancellors think now about where they're going with their organisations. It was almost suggested to me that he had gone out and suggested to various government members that they host the Commonwealth Games. And then that they put it near Griffith University, and then that they put the accommodation there. Because he knew that as a 75 as a 70s institution, the government was never going to come to the party with the sort of resources that all the others had got. And he really saw the value of having accommodation on campus, and that was a pretty smart, visionary thing for him to do. Because
I think you might be giving Willis just a little bit too much credit. But
maybe. Again,
actually, surprisingly enough, the person who according to the documentation, I mean, but it does seem fairly likely that Leo Heisler was the one who said, look, here's an opportunity to be able to put the hard word on the Commonwealth government to get resources that we're not going to get otherwise. Then John picked it up, and John actually went to other people at LSU, and they all got together and kept. See, there was a real treasury network. I don't know, how conscious were you that they were investing huge sums of Commonwealth money on the short-term money market, and they made millions.
Yeah, I know.
Millions.
That wasn't a huge secret.
No. Again, but that's the funny thing about Griffith.
Certainly if you're involved on the staff side, it wasn't a huge secret. And during that time, both Sian and I were working in various parts of the administration. So that was really well known. Yeah,
it didn't seem to me, from what I've heard, that it was a big secret, but it did seem to me that it was quite unusual that it could have been an open secret, and nobody from the very conservative government, even with Heisler and Syria and people like that on side, didn't kick up about it.
You probably have to go a bit lateral and see who else was doing it, because I think the practice was widespread. And I mean, of course, the very key famous government Congos went down the tube.
My knowledge of that was a Kev C brainwave, and I thought, the way I heard it was a Kev C idea, but it was an idea that he had got.
It's an idea that he was aware of from being in the other sort of general. Anyway, that's probably irrelevant. It's only just a talking point that they made, and it might be a sentence, they make some money, which I think is quite clever of them. Why not?
Yep.
But why Kev C hung into the job for so long, because he was very good at that.
But I suspect if I'd been a student who'd enrolled in 1982, I would have found it quite intrusive.
Yeah.
This is always the thing with students. I mean, there's a trade-off always for the institution between people who are there for 1 year or 2 year or 3 year time frame against the institution's vested interest in long-term perspective. And this is something I used to argue with them about. It's all well and good for you to tell me you're just making up as you go along, but I'm only here now.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. So, when would you say that I did it during your time there, settled down to a sort of a pattern where the students were able to recognisably see what they were doing and manage it without too much trauma for a degree?
Well, it hadn't in humanities by 1980.
Yeah, I would have said post 1980, perhaps even post the games, which was what, 82?
82 in the game, so it would have been 83 before the 7th day.
They might have got the shit together by 81, but I don't think our chance in that first obvious, I don't think so.
I think it varied from school to school too. I mean, I looked at what I wrote in 1979 about science, and of course they were in another building, but I think that it stayed quite conservative in some senses, the science degree, because it had a body of scientists working in the school, and maybe there weren't such big divisions about approaches to teaching and other sorts of issues that happened in some of the other places. I think AES still had, I can remember students coming in perpetually complaining about the stick and spin units with their self-paced instruction in chemistry, self-paced instruction in mathematics, which were attempts to...
Didn't the science students do that as well? Stick and spin?
Self-pacing in mathematics was Calvin Rose's baby.
That was AES-based rather than science-based.
No, it was very much AES-based as a method of getting particularly mature age students out of mathematics. But I believe it was used in science as well.
I'm pretty sure it was used in science.
I'm not sure where else it might be.
So I guess what I'm wondering is why didn't the science students have problems with it and the AES students had problems with it?
I think, here I'm only going by the documentation, I think because there were minimal, but there were some sort of prerequisites in science that didn't exist in AES or humanities.
And also there were people who had to get through stick and spin and wanted to go off and do social sciences where they didn't really need necessarily to do those skills again, and because of the view that people needed to gain broad bases and gain skills that they might not use in the next 2 or 3 years, but would go out and need to have there was an argument that even if you were not that you were moving away from becoming an expert. That's another key phrase I'll say for good. A generalist, not an expert, and a generalist who had to have perhaps some body of knowledge, but they also needed to have an appreciation of other people's body of knowledges, and that was part of the 20th century problem.
Yes.
And I think AES, and if I put it in a rank order for you, I'd say, and it's partly perverted by my own experiences, humanities is still a disaster area. They were still going through chairman at the rate of knots, and it was a particularly problematic issue. We had a real concern about the power base of the school administrator as opposed to of the school chairman, and in fact, to give Pat some credit, she was in fact the de facto school chairman for a number of years and was seen as a much more powerful figure in the school than any of the people who actually run the school from the point of view of the academic side of things. And then I think AES continues to be a problem because really it almost came ahead of the market for the graduates. And so the graduates themselves, to some extent, were trying to conservatise the degree program because they couldn't get jobs.
Exactly.
Whereas now, numbers of those people are getting really important and significant jobs. And again, I know people that work on the Shoalwater Bay inquiry who went to Griffith in that period of time.
And you made the point though too about the eventual success of the humanities people. In hindsight, I just wonder whether some of the what were perceived at the time as real problems, and that the student body and staff, academic staff, were reacting against, may, when it all comes out in the wash, have been part of the success of it. The very fact that it was usable, the very fact that it was changing, and both AES and humanities, it's untrue to say that AES didn't have their own internal team fighting, because they did, between the mathematicians versus the people teaching sociology. I mean, there's nothing to do, really, in a disciplinary sense, to have sociologists teaching alongside pure mathematicians and chemists.
But as you say, the difficulties, as we touched on before, helped to create that culture, didn't they?
And the two parts of the organisation that clung to that culture for the longest, I think, were humanities and AES, and the very two parts were also the most problematic.
Yeah, but building this culture costs in terms of students. Degree potential, I suppose, is probably a word you could use. That's it, And the difficulty in actually achieving, in putting it all together, I suppose.
Oh yeah, it was raging as a debate in front of you. It was hard to put it together, and it's possibly only with the benefit of the hindsight of coming out of the system for 4 or 5 years. I mean, you sort of came out going, I'm ready to think of what does it all mean? Whereas I've begun to see immense value. The more time I spend out there, the more time I value my time at Griffith.
But I mean, it sounds everybody uses the word friendly, family, exciting,
it was
provocative, all innovative, and all the rest of things.
Provocative, I would.
Was there any? It seems to me that there was very few other times that you can think of when that could have happened.
Except in the new institution.
Yes, that's what I mean. I probably didn't say it, but it seems to me that an institution such as Griffith could not have been created at another time.
Very true. So the political and economic culture at the time really, in a lot of ways, gave rise to a place like Griffith.
And Murdoch did it. I mean, Murdoch was created in the same year as Griffith, and that would be the most interesting comparison, I think, because it was created at the same time, and in a funny, similar environment, very conservative. At a time when ultra-right-wing conservative government, these radical things emerged, popped up in the middle of it.
It's an interesting concept. Have you any ideas about? There was coordination between
there was.
I believe. I've only heard it down. Have you any ideas as to why that these things popped up in two very conservative states in a very conservative environment? Was it just reaction against it, or is it more than that?
Well, I suppose my own view is there was a radicalisation of the population at that time because the views of, I think views of the Conservative government certainly had an impact on many of the state level. But I think it's really embarrassing to ask this in the middle of Are you a vegetarian? No. Somebody didn't really say.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'll eat either. I don't. You can put anything in front of me and I'm happy.
Well, I'm going to put both in front of you. You can pick one again. No, I won't.
What were we in the middle of? Oh, how did it happen?
Yeah, it's
why?
I mean, yeah, why and how, yeah.
I suppose I thought, because I think the why, and I think it emerged in the degree programs too, there was a polarisation, I think, of the society at that time, more broadly than in the institution. And I think that the catch cries of Griffith drew to it people who were polarised from, you know, if you were conservative, you were far more likely to go to Queensland University and you were far more likely to lecture in Queensland University as well. But bear in mind, one of the other things that we said frequently was that we were attracting a young and dynamic staff. And quite a lot of the people that were lecturing were quite young at that time in 75 and probably not that developed in their careers. So I guess you were more likely to attract those people who were attracted also by those alternatives. And I can remember some quite radical lecturing about...
People who had a doctorate on one hand in those first 3 or 4 years, you know. They had Mr. and Ms. So-and-so who had basically like perhaps had an honours degree and done a pretty interesting thesis and had submitted their application and been accepted on those grounds.
Yes, there was always a great worry on the council about the quality of staff, but at the same time, and I mean, one of the great disasters that we've seen from the people I've spoken to so far, and yes, I think I could say all, was, we can't get a vice chancellor because we're not good enough.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that was a real worry. But at the same time, people are telling me that the staff that were employed very, very early in the piece was because there was money available here, and that had started to close up in the United States and in Britain. So there were some very, very brilliant people who were attracted, but as you say, were young, and hadn't had they hadn't been cultured into a traditional organisation.
That's right.
So, do you think that was part of what helped to develop the whole thing?
I can remember it being said a number of times that, you know, it was young dynamic staff and that it had a radically different staff profile and its age profile to the traditional institution. And I think that the institution, there was also an interesting kind of attempt to break down barriers between what are now called general staff and academic staff in a way that didn't occur in any other institutional context. And I don't know, because I wasn't on general staff until 1980, what impact that had, but I think there was an attempt to marry up and change some of those dynamics to educate academics about maybe some of the management issues in universities and to educate general staff about some of the academic parameters of the institution. And I think that might have been another positive thing that contributed to the institution's kind of positive survival into the 90s, when in fact that's exactly what the government, you know, and you keep running across these things and thinking, isn't that interesting, because that's the government agenda now in some senses.
Yeah.
And there's this notion of managerialism within the academic concept and how that relates to collegiality and those sorts of things, which I think were also intruded on by the Griffith ethos in ways that some academics found really uncomfortable.
Yes, totally uncomfortable.
I think they did. That seems to be true. Now, that does appear to have been driven very, very strongly and probably may well have originated with John Willett and his managerial style.
Yep, I think so too.
That part of it was... From what I can gather from the administrative and general staff now, that there is a strong residue of that, and they feel part of the university more than anywhere else. There is obvious different identity of interest, but there is a collegiality amongst a whole lot, and Presley and Topley and those were very, very keen, and of course driven by Willett again. So that seems to be one of the things that has survived.
Yeah, it's possible, you know.
It seems to have. I'll have to look a little bit closer, but that's interesting to know that you were conscious of that at the time as well.
Yeah.
From a student perspective.
Well, I think, as I said, in humanities, and I think also in Asian studies, there's some comments in there about Phil Rowan's role, and Phil Rowan is someone else you probably should speak to because he's been there as long as Pat knows, and he's gone on to the student secretary's position if he's still there, I think. And he was one of the very, very earliest staff of the institution also, and he very much, I think, I really do appreciate that when I went later to work in Asian studies and became his 2IC, if you like. I did the postgraduate administration, but he set a lot of academic agendas in that school in the sense of channeling some ideas. I mean, the capacity to translate it into a doable thing, and sometimes just doing it, and then convincing other people it ought to be done. And I don't think there's very many institutional precedents for the level of involvement a Pat Noda or a Phil Rowan would have had as the school administrator in setting some of the actual key academic agendas for the organisation.
No, so an organisational agenda that covered every level, from the teaching down to the day-to-day running.
Because Ian worked for Pat, so...
Yeah, right. People like Phil and Pat were, they ran the place.
Yeah.
Simple as that. But they were also very conscious of the original ethos, and they may have had their different interpretations of it, but they were, both of them were still working from what they understood to be the founding ethos of the place.
Are you, either of you or both of you, conscious at any time of Willett or any of the people who could drive this or who could even discuss it, I suppose, anybody, that we need to modify this? Now is the time. That the philosophy was fine, it's up there, but we have to get to practical issues and we can't carry on with it.
I was very conscious of a period where John Toffey seemed to have that as very high on his agenda. It was around about the time of the change of Vice Chancellors, where probably a lot of people who were up the top of the pile were into a bit of a power struggle. Whether they really believe what they're saying, I'm not sure.
Before we get to that interregnum and the change of Vice Chancellor, was there a time that either of you may be conscious of John Willett himself saying, look, there's time to modify this very, very broad and start to bring it at least to some degree into a, I suppose, respectability, academic respectability.
I could imagine that John may be able to, because you have a lot more contact with John.
I think there was this phrase that I'm only fairly indirectly aware of, and I think it might have been 6 or 7 years. I'm aware of Ted Bray. I was either on the council or attending the council by invitation to discuss various items at a while. In fact, interestingly enough, I had permanent visiting rights at council, and that was another strange Griffith concept, that there were a whole range of people who could sit on the side and then just pop up to the table for an item and pop back down again. I think Ted Bray had real concerns about, as the Chancellor of the institution, and some of the external members did as well, about, are we really competing here? Are we struggling for student numbers? And I do remember a time, maybe very late 70s, early 80s, where there were concerns about, coming from the academics, coming about dropout rates, and are we really attracting the best students here? So I think that there was some push from down, and I don't know whether there wasn't some push from above. I mean, the institution was copying a lot of public press about Griffith University students tromping all over civil liberties demonstrations and getting arrested and things, where both the sort of, and I think there were changes in the funding environment developing in that at that stage as well.
Around that time.
That's
what
right.
What are you talking?
Fraser gang,
80, 81 period.
Fraser, where I think that those people that had conservative agendas, coupled with the fact that the institution was changing in the dynamics of size, that there were some discussions like that, but they were fairly tangential to me, and I couldn't give you a lot of feeling about that beyond saying I was aware that something like that was going on, and I think there were people who argued with John Willett and argued in academic circles that things were being lost all the time to a conservative agenda, and certainly students were saying that. You said we were going to be, this is going to be radical, and you're telling us what assessment we're going to have exams. What about the alternative forms of assessment? And I went once and argued on the basis of council documents about the philosophy of a school, that they said they were catering to individual student programs. So I wanted to do an individual student program instead of 2 courses out of 4 in a semester. And I won that, and the loophole got closed up afterwards. So the administrative realities and the dynamics of actually keeping to these agendas in the push to increase your student numbers, grow in a fiscally tight environment, I think it was probably inevitable, coupled with the changing dynamics of size, that there were going to be some changes. And I think size has had a big impact on some of the changes that people have resented, which have been, and the post-dynamics of amalgamations and that whole radical shift in agenda.
I was also,
I think you've put your put your finger on it. I think it is a combination of all those factors, but you're quite right. It has started out, and it's not always a conscious decision. It's an evolution of narrowing in order to cater for economic pressures, size pressures, professional pressures, and social pressures. The whole lot of it comes in. But I suppose ultimately what I'll probably try to figure out is how much of the original philosophy has retained. What I was getting at there was that process seems to have actually started with John Willett
himself.
Yeah.
And it doesn't surprise me in a sense that did, because he always was a person who was 10 years down the track wherever he was.
Now that you mention it, I think he may have, in his last year of being a Vice-Chancellor, which was also, I think, my first year of being a General Staff member, he did a lot of things where he planted seeds before he left. And I think what Sian's saying is that, like, okay, so whether he could actually foresee what direction it went in, I think he had a view of where it would go. I think he had a grasp on the idea that it would have to change in some way to survive. And my impression of his last year there was that, yes, there were seeds planted in all kinds of different areas. Like, I remember having a talk when we were on the General Staff Association, one of the last chats we had with John Willett, and he started raising issues that we perhaps hadn't looked at, and so he's planting a seed there. I think he mentioned things to people about the forthcoming selection process for the new Vice-Chancellor, so there were seeds planted there. The Cramer Review had just gone through, I think, at the university. There was much talk about academic standards at that time, and I think he also planted seeds there as something to look out for in terms of preserving the longer life.
No, and both.
Just on this one too, there was a review of there was an actual institutional review. Now I can't remember when it was, what interdisciplinarity was, and what is it. Yeah, there were a few, but there was an institutional-wide review.
There was a big one that came up.
Really big one.
Yeah, I think I've come across it in the files, but it actually was a process that went on
for a couple of years.
Yes, that's right.
Yep.
The actual years escape me, but
I think you might find
it went over that period. I think it was stimulated by that sort of interregnum period between Willett, and I think it's in my head, it's 87, 86, 87, 88. I might be wrong on that.
Yeah, I think there might be one before that.
Well, there were. And that, of course, was a major concern too.
Yes.
What actually happened in that time? I've heard various different...
My recollection was there was one round. There was a very extensive selection process set up by the council, which was probably an unmanageable elephant. I think there were 1,001 people on the actual selection panel, as well as days of consultations with all the different interest groups.
With the ethos, then
they did actually
input from everybody.
They did actually pick the selection committee, but one person went off overseas.
Boxman was an applicant, as I recall.
Yes.
As I recall, the first round had... I can't remember the academics because I wasn't involved in the selection, but I thought that there were two people.
There was a choice made.
There was a perception that one person had administrative credibility and not academic acceptability, and I think that was Boxman.
I think you might be right. I'll have to check.
Yeah. Very discreet of you. Well, I can say that's my understanding of what went on at that time was Boxman was an applicant. I think he was very acceptable to the state government because he was running a range of National Party agendas for the state government at that time, and he was seen to be a good administrator, but he was seen to be fairly ruthless, and he was also seen by his academic colleagues to, I think, be unacceptable in the collegiate realm and unacceptable in a academically credentialed realm given his recent work. And I can't remember who the person was.
I don't know. I honestly don't.
I don't know who the other person was.
Quite frankly, it's in my notes. Ted Bray mentioned it.
Right.
There was a favourite applicant who was then, for one reason or another, not acceptable to the whole community.
It's probably not all that important in who the applicants were, but what is important is the fact that the council split 50-50, and there was one person who could have decided the matter, and he went overseas. Decided to... the way Ted Bray tells it, it seems like it was deliberate.
I didn't know that.
John Willett was persuaded to stay on. And that is, to this day, Ted just almost threw himself off his own bloody balcony when he met her.
When he had to discuss it.
Mad about it.
That'd be Ted. Yes.
And, but however...
as he can get.
Yes.
Well, I suppose to me, I mean, as somebody who really felt the institution, I thought the council was too gutless to appoint or even look for or creatively find, and that, I thought that was the beginning of the end, really, because they suddenly went, what do we do now? And they opted for all the traditional things institutions wanted in Vice-Chancellor.
Well, that sort of happened
and that
after
was the big mistake to me. And then they picked someone like Roy,
there was a
who comes from the most
thing went on
conservative, large institutional environment, and kept questioning. The first year he was there, it was this boring diatribe of we don't do it that way at Melbourne.
Yes.
And a whole bunch of sycophants who ended up around him doing the way we did it at Melbourne.
Yeah. Have you got any sense that over the time period that Roy's been there now, that he may not have been as bad as he looked like at the beginning, that some things have survived, or is it, do you still feel?
Only on the basis of advice from other people that is closer to him than I've been.
Anyway.
And a number of people have said that to me. So it's basically a decent human being.
Yeah, but that's not the point, is it really?
No, that as well as being, but I think there were a lot of people who wouldn't have even given him that much in the beginning, to be dead honest with you. And that he does have a tendency to just in his own way try and question whether that's really where it should be running, and that I think he is aware in some ways that there was this alternate Griffith thing, and he's grown with it a little over the period, and that maybe he's not as bad as we thought. But my experiences of him have all been
pretty negative. Well, I'm trying to cope with his claim that the changes that he made to Griffith, to the original philosophy, and don't quote me on this, but please, have been things that were inevitable due to funding, due to all of these other things. Now, John Topley would say, yes, but the bloody bastard could have done more. Now, again...
More what?
More
what?
It was like one.
I'll have...
There are some classic errors of government.